So, welcome to another episode of the Mormon Truth Videos on the Dodger Game channel, in which we're going to be exploring a very important topic. And so I'm going to get right to that. First, I want to say, though, however, that the subject of how we filter reality and the biases that we put on things are often results of conditioning that we receive from organizations that want us to shut down our critical thinking processes so that we cannot evaluate things rationally, which might show factual evidence that does not support the assertion that such an organization, in this case here, this study was done relative to the Watchtower Bible Interact Society, the Jehovah's Witnesses, showing the techniques they use upon their people to get them to shut down mentally and not notice when things are contrary to the beliefs that they have installed in their minds, that the Jehovah's Witnesses, that the Watchtower organization is in fact God's one true church on the earth, that their leaders are divinely guided by their God, who is Jehovah. So in this, I'm going to run through, see a few of our more recent videos here, and we're going to be focusing this time on this girl here named Sarah Newcomb, and she's going to be having an interview with John Dehlin. John Dehlin, I believe he's into psychology at this point. He was an Elders Quorum president and started to, I think he started off maybe doing some kind of survey work on why people were leaving the church in mass, for reasons that were not just because they wanted to go party or something, but that people that had just discovered church history and various contradictions, to the assertion that an all-knowing, unchanging, perfect God was guiding the church through revelation to the brethren. There are certain irreconcilable issues that people have with that when they discover the fact that the church has altered and rewritten its history, and that there are many contradictions within the LDS canon of Scripture, and that the brethren are actively involved in still covering up history and so forth, and trying to create perceptions that are not correct with regard to all these things on LDS.org and church manuals and so forth. So here, John has been doing a series called Losing the Lamanites. Sarah here has one parent that is, from Ireland, I suppose, the British Isles, and one that would be considered Native American tribe member from, I think, an island off Alaska. And so John's been exploring various aspects of the identity of people who come from a heritage where they have strongly identified as members of Native American tribes and so forth, and or especially as Lamanites in the church, and what they've discovered and how that's affected their lives, especially when they've learned of the DNA evidence showing that they in fact are not Lamanites, because 99.4% of the Native American tribe people tested come from, around Mongolia, Siberia, across the Bering Strait long before Adam, and didn't get washed away by Noah's flood. They were not Israelites. And their skin color apparently didn't come from an arbitrary cursing from God separating them from the white Delites and Nephites, is basically what a lot of this boils down to. So her perspective that she's found in her life is very useful, I think, to the discussion of what's going on here, and then how the leadership of the church and church apologists have taken information and what it is that they do with that and why. With basically the intent of sacrificing any and all to maintain the belief that the Book of Mormon is what it claims to be and that the church is what it claims to be, at the expense of human beings' lives. So this is pretty revealing. Try to view it with an open mind. Try to evaluate factual information rather than be biased and say, oh, this is of the devil. These people are... She was a faithful, member of the church, not someone who wanted to go party. She discovered things, and this is the process of that, and how the whole church apologetics enters into it, the teachings, the deliberate deception. At least from my point of view, that's the way things are here. I try to be as honest as possible in my video presentations. Everyone's going to have a certain perspective. I have mine, but I try to put things forth honestly and accurately, and I've noticed many LDS apologists do not. So having said that, honestly, the perspective that I'm coming from in here is chiefly to evaluate through the things we learn here how it relates to the question in maybe your mind as to whether or not the LDS Church is indeed guided by an honest, loving, good, unchanging, omniscient God. So you can evaluate the information and see how his organization works and how the scriptures work and how LDS.org and the gospel topic essays and so forth that are approved by the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 and the church's policies related to the truth.
Well, it's beautiful in many ways. They both served missions, then they met and got married, they had 4 children, they retired, they go on a mission. It's brought a lot of joy to them. But they come, I don't judge the older generations. I have a hard time, judging our elders just because they didn't have the information. I'm, okay, truth moment, I'm 40. I didn't have this information. I went through college at Rick's without any of this access to information. It was just really starting to become easy. I had all my years written down. In 2015, when my son got baptized and then I started researching, that was the first time I'd heard of the essays. I didn't even know that they existed, So how would I expect my parents to know any stuff? I will say the essay, Race in the Priesthood, the first time I read it, I was like, oh, so Lamanite skin's not a curse. And then I read it again. And again and again, and I'm like, it has nothing to do with Lamanites. It had to do with relieving, the African Americans from the curse. But so I was like, well, are we still cursed? And there's so much information I found. I have notes everywhere of sources, but it is current in the seminary manual. It's currently in the student manual for eternal marriage. It is a current belief that Lamanite skin is cursed. It's not, it just means spiritually. People like to put that, the being cursed sign, the sign of the curse was just a spiritual sign. No, it literally says, hang on, let me grab one because I am not good at remembering. Here's the seminary manual, current seminary manual. Why was the mark of dark skin set upon the Lamanites? That the Lamanites might not be enticing, the Lord God did cause a skin of blackness to come upon them. So they didn't want them to marry with the Nephites. In the 2013 manual, they use a quote by Joseph Fielding Smith that says, the dark skin of those who have come into the church is no longer considered to be a sign of the curse. But that's only for the dark-skinned people who have come into the church. Like, the sign still exists. So me sourcing, I'm like, well, what context has this been taken out of? Because that's just how my brain works. I got obsessed. So I went and I started reading the answers to gospel questions. Like, I've read Journal of Discourses. I've gone through, so many books. But in Answers to Gospel Questions, Volume 3 by Joseph Fielding Smith, it says, in full context with what I just read you. It continues from, many of these converts are delightsome and have the Spirit of the Lord. Perhaps there are some Lamanites today who are losing the dark pigment. Many of the members of the church among the Catawba Indians of the South could readily pass as of the white race. The Lord commanded the Nephites not to intermarry with them, for if they did, they would partake of the curse. And that's actually something that I heard from people, like, that their children would be cursed. You know, it's passed on. And at the very end of Joseph Fielding Smith's quote, it said, evil brought a return of the curse. So he talked about how when the Savior came, the Lamanite skins were all lightened, and the Lamanites and Nephites, everybody was the same. But then the Lamanites people that decided to turn evil again, evil brought return of dark skin. So, like, when I hear this apologetic stuff about, they're not talking about the skin, they're talking about your spirit, you know, a darkness came over their spirit. No, they're talking about the skin. It's in the current seminary manuals. It's in the current student manual for marriage. It's all over the place.
Most importantly, the Book of Mormon is very clear that the skin is made dark.
Yeah.
You might be able to find one verse over here where it sounds like there's a difference between the cursing and the mark or whatever, but there are other verses where it's unambiguous. Skin is turned dark because of wickedness.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, and I was also taught that, like, the Lamanites are constantly moving now. I'm like, you know, with DNA and everything changing. And one of the other apologetics is that, like, I have only one quote from Fair Mormon, and it's location of the Nephites and Lamanites. And it says, the church has made it abundantly clear that it does not endorse any particular view of the Book of Mormon geography. Technically, it does, because in an article by Bruce R. McConkie, quoting Joseph Fielding Smith, it's called Doctrines of Salvation. Article is called Where is the Hill Cumorah? And it talks about, like, I don't want to read it. It's pretty long. But he says, Joseph Smith himself is on record definitely declaring the present hill called Cumorah to be on the exact hill in the Book of Mormon. It is difficult for a reasonable person to believe that such men as Oliver Cowdery, Brigham Young, Parley P. Pratt, Orson Pratt, David Whitmer, and others could speak frequently of the spot where the prophet Joseph Smith obtained the plates as the hill Cumorah and not be corrected by the prophet if that were not a fact. So that, to me, is saying geography.
Do you know what apologists would say? That Joseph didn't even know.
Yeah, and that to me is ironic. Like the Book of LDS.org, the DNA study stuff, how it says the Book of Mormon itself doesn't claim to know if the people were the predominant people. But it used to say that on the Book of Mormon page. My mom was taught that. People are still being taught. Like, this year, Elder Anderson went and told young Native Americans, there's an article. The article's titled, Tells Young Native American Members They Are Part of the Book of Mormon. If anybody wants to look up the article. Yeah. So he says, the Book of Mormon is true and you are part of it. The Book of Mormon is written for the descendants of the children of Lehi. And he's talking to singles from Kirtland, Gallup, and Crown Point, New Mexico. So people are still being taught that. Like,
yeah.
If we don't know where the Lamanites are, which, okay, great, take that route. We don't know. Claim the ignorance. Why are we teaching people that they're the Lamanites then? You know, it's plausible deniability. They're taking every route possible and saying, oh no, look, this is what it is. Oh no, look over here. And that's not the way it was in the beginning, you know? The way the church started out, it was black and white. Literally.
Not only that, but the Book of Mormon claims that its purpose is to convert. It's for the Lamanites to convert the true blood of Israel back to Christ. And so how ironic that the most important book ever brought to mankind, whose explicit purpose is to bring the original blood of Israel back to Christ, now we don't know who that blood of Israel is anymore, especially given that DNA shows overwhelmingly that Native Americans come from Mongolia, not from Israel. Who are these pure blood of Israel that the Book of Mormon is written for? It's this incredibly shrinking Lamanite. And now,
well, and I think some of why they avoid any of this, dealing with any of this, is because if they say that, oh, well, you know what, the Native American skin, it's not cursed either, then that destroys the Book of Mormon. Like, they can't say that, you know, they've done it for blacks in the priesthood, for the race. They've said, okay, that was wrong, that wasn't a curse. They can't do that for the Lamanites, because if they do, it takes away the power of the Book of Mormon.
And you are exactly right, Sarah. That is exactly correct. It would destroy the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon came forth. Joseph Smith brought the Book of Mormon forth and published it, claimed it was a record which explained why we have dark-skinned people living in the American continents when the Europeans got here. It explained them as being a lost tribe of the house of Israel that was cursed with a dark skin by God because of their wickedness. So it explained that they came across on boats brought by the Lord, explained their presence as being something other than something that would contradict biblical Christianity, the story in Genesis, the Adam in the garden story, which the DNA studies now bring, well, heavy evidence against. That evidence being that these people are in fact East Asian, that they came across after an ice age which occurred long before the biblical timeline starts with Adam leaving any garden. It also is problematic to Genesis because they were not destroyed in the biblical flood story, which shows as 2344 BC in the biblical timeline, and would have wiped them out. Would have been after Adam, but you know, long before these Lamanites came, and about 150 years before the Jaredites came. So the whole Book of Mormon narrative is based upon biblical Christianity and the Genesis rendition of Adam and Eve and the flood wiping everybody out, and then these people coming across on a ship or barges, depending on the group. Jaredites having wiped themselves out in a massive civil war. So you can't say that these people are not what the Book of Mormon says without destroying the Book of Mormon. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is based upon the evidence Joseph Smith presented to the world of him being a prophet. He initially started saying, I've got these golden plates, an angel showed them to me, and they are the record of a lost tribe of the house of Israel that came across the ocean, brought by the hand of the Lord, that Jesus Christ visited them. It's a second witness to the resurrected Christ, and so on and so forth. Basically, Doctrine and Covenants, we're told, it contains the fullness of the gospel, that the Book of Mormon does, but it certainly doesn't. Most of what Mormons are known for comes in later and is in the Doctrine and Covenants, you know, having to do with eternal marriage, baptism for the dead, all that sort of a thing, whole plan of salvation. It's not in the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is largely Christian and not what Mormons are known for. However, it gives evidence that Joseph Smith is a prophet. And so they tell you, read the Book of Mormon, pray about it. If you'll feel good, that means it's true. That means God called a prophet to translate it through means that they like to ignore, like a magic rock or magic spectacles or something, just say the gift and power of God. That's a whole other gospel topics essay issue. But it accounts for these people being here and their origin as Israelites, and the DNA studies show that in fact is not the truth. And so Sarah said, okay, well, used to say in the Book of Mormon, in the preface it said that the American Indians are the descendants of the Lamanites. That the Lamanites, the children of Lehi, were the primary ancestors of the American Indians, and that's basically been proven not to be the case. And so she's saying, hey, so they changed the Book of Mormon, they took that out of the preface, and even though Moroni supposedly told that to Joseph Smith, or the angel, maybe it was recorded as Nephi at that point, because it was everything was changed to Moroni after he was dead. So, not only that, Sarah, the Book of Mormon, now she just mentioned that in the essays they say, well, they weren't alone here, they weren't the only people, and she brought that up. And the essays do say that, but what I've noted in some of my videos that go over the DNA essay is that the Book of Mormon actually states within its own pages that God promised the children of Lehi that he would, isolate them, that he had and would continue to isolate them from the rest of the world, that they might possess the land unto themselves. And so it very much tells us and supports the belief that these people came to a virtually uninhabited land. It had only been inhabited by the Jaredites, and they'd killed themselves off in a massive civil war. That, of course, doesn't work for the church's new assertion to try to save the Book of Mormon from the DNA studies. And what they say is, well, they just disappeared into this massive population. That's why you can't find their DNA. It just disappeared. There were so many people already here. They lead a vague suggestion as to how that might have been. And they mention, well, anthropologists say that these other people have come across the Bering States. They don't get into the details that are problematic there. In other words, that this was pre-Adamite. This was before Adam left the garden, even if it was in Missouri, that these people came across. They were pre-Adamite people, and they were not washed away by Noah's flood, because bringing attention to that basically destroys biblical theology and therefore Mormon theology, which is based upon the back of Christianity, with the assumption that those things are true. And Joseph Smith went through the Bible, did his Joseph Smith translation, and among the changes that took place, the flood of Noah did not disappear. No, it did not. It's reaffirmed in the Book of Moses, in the 8 chapters, I believe, that we've got in the Pearl of Great Price, from that retranslation of the Bible by Joseph Smith, inspired translation, as he says, and it's got about 3 extra chapters worth in those first 8, really there, adding additional information. So, yeah, the Book of Mormon, the validity, the veracity of the church, the authenticity of it is completely destroyed by the whole DNA issue. And when she talked about the essay number 1 being about race and the priesthood, well, it is focused on the African Negro question. Basically, it's PR work trying to say, okay, right, well, we'll just throw Brigham and the rest, 13 prophets under the bus and say they were just following social trends and denied Negroes the priesthood. They don't even talk about the temple, which is really the reason, in my opinion, because of the segregation that existed in Freemasonry, and they couldn't share signs and tokens from the York Rite with the black brethren. That would have to be in the Prince Hall Rite with their own signs and tokens. I believe that's the real issue. But they just basically try to blame it on racism of former prophets, say they were influenced by society, and then they deny specifically that dark skin or black skin, skin of blackness, is a sign of divine disfavor and a curse. And specifically, it says that it is the case in the Book of Mormon. Of course, that essay avoids the use of the scriptures, except for one that says black and white are all alike unto God somewhere in the Book of Mormon, but doesn't get into the God cursing the Lamanites with the dark skin. Even though that's about African Negroes and the priesthood, it also avoids the whole portion where the Book of Abraham chapter 1 says that the Canaanites could not have the priesthood because they were cursed, and then those things are linked to Moses chapter 7 where some people called the Canaanites got turned black, that all men would despise them after they murdered the people of Shem. So clearly Canaanites are linked together with people that could not receive the priesthood, which of course all got supposedly translated by Joseph Smith, 1842, the exact months, when he became a Freemason and then introduced Freemasonry into the LDS endowment, which would have precluded having black members in there, because it would be obvious to everyone that he was violating his Masonic blood oath covenants not to reveal these signs and tokens to people who were not initiated into that York Rite of Freemasonry. Anyway, that's the way it looks to me. So the church throws it all into the, all under the title of racism, and then they basically can recover themselves there, and they avoid letting you see that they're contradicting scripture given through Joseph Smith by God, supposedly. They just avoid that and blame Brigham. But see, the fact is they do destroy LDS scripture, because this doctrine does come out of Abraham and Moses in those books as scripture revealed to Joseph Smith as a prophet. They've cleverly tried to obfuscate that. With the DNA issue, it's even more obvious, so that's why they've tried other tactics, and they're very deceptive, and they do lie. Like she said, they say it that these people did not come, that they were not alone, the Lamanites here, and the Book of Mormon clearly teaches that that's the case. So, great point, Sarah. Let's continue. It all really boils down to the church based initially on deception and continues to be, continue to survive only through deception, which is what is practiced on LDS.org, and those essays are approved by the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12. And they lie, contradicting the scriptures and then just avoiding mentioning them. You got it,
it takes away the truthfulness of it. The most correct book on earth.
And there's no essay addressing this, as you mentioned, and you're saying that's your theory as to why, because it strikes too close to the heart of authority and scripture within Mormonism.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you read, I'm just going to read this. This is 2 Nephi
chapter 5.
5:21, and he caused the cursing to come upon them, yea, even a sore cursing because of their iniquity. For behold, they had hardened their hearts against him, that they had become like unto a flint. Wherefore, as they were white and exceedingly fair and delightsome, that they might not be enticing unto my people, the Lord God did cause a skin of blackness to come upon them. So not only is it saying that they were made dark because of their wickedness, but it's saying that God sees blackness as bad, and that he didn't want them to be attractive to the white people, so he made them black so they wouldn't be attractive. I mean,
exactly. So there's the presupposition that dark skin means evil and means ugly, because it says that the Lord would make them loathsome. They're later described as filthy. This is describing the Lamanites, the American Indians. So that's convenient for the church to basically blame everything on racial prejudice and that sort of a thing. However, as I stated, it was the segregation of Masonry that I believe necessitated creating an excuse to keep blacks out of the temple. And it was an explaining of how these people got here, explaining something in anthropology that did not contradict Genesis, and gave plausible evidence that God was restoring his own church through a newly called prophet, Joseph Smith, just giving Joseph Smith evidence to validate his own authority and be head of a new religion. So, as much as the church would like to just blame things on racism and then push the narrative of political correctness, which they are into, because apparently it's a huge corporate empire, and corporate governance seems to be the guiding influence of bringing political correctness into all sorts of companies. We see the same themes in all sorts of commercials that are pushing politically correct themes which have nothing to do with the product that they're marketing. And why is that? Well, I'm not going to explain everything about corporate governance right here. I got a great couple of videos that do show that, mainly because of the work of a guy who I bring into that from his videos off of what's the name of his deal? Anyway, they're in there, and you can see the rest of them. But I've got excerpts that basically show how corporate governance basically bypasses constitutional law in the United States through the power of the shareholders over boards of directors and creating company policy based on who owns the shares. So if you have a large voting block determined by stock holdings, and if you have a block of huge corporate conglomerates working together with the same agenda, you can create rule through corporate governance. And so the question becomes, who owns the preferred shares of the corporation of the First Presidency, or the corporation of the President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and other pivotal corporate enterprises involved with the LDS empire? Who owns LDS Inc.? Seems that their agenda seems to be very much in line with the rest of these corporations that are moving towards globalism, uniting all religions, uniting nations, a single governing body, and one currency. There's plenty of evidence to that effect. There's plenty of evidence of involvement in secret and secretive societies in the church and its leadership, and those in political and economic power. And I've shown that in the secret combination, Book of Mormon secret combination, corporate governance videos, and you can view those and see how the evidence looks, especially when you look at the comprehensive annual financial reports issued by bodies that you thought were publicly owned bodies of governance, governing bodies, and turn out to be private enterprise. Anyhow, in other words, cities, states, counties, pension funds, public-private partnerships. The world is just much different than we're led to believe. So the church is a giant corporate conglomerate, and we see it having an agenda to create the new order of the ages. You can call that what you like, but look at the evidence and try to evaluate it objectively, just like this. That's all I ask.
I mean, that's offensive in like 12 different ways, right?
Probably at least
Yeah.
3, John.
Yeah, and sometimes I don't like saying too much about my parents because they are true believers and they're good people, and I wouldn't want to hurt them in any way. And so even as a true believer, when I was full in, it was hard for me to see what they went through as an interracial couple because they got married in the 60s. One of the manual from Teachings of Spencer W. Kimball says, "When I said you must teach people to overcome their prejudice and accept the Indians, I did not mean that to encourage you to intermarry." And there was a lot of problem. You know, he came from my dad came from a very, true blue, good Mormon family with a long history. And so that, I know it was hard for them to see him marry, but I'll give it to my dad. He's one of the most gentle, accepting, kind people. And I think that's why my mom was drawn to him and why they were drawn to each other. So, yeah.
Sean's asking what your patriarchal blessing said about your lineage.
Oh, gosh. This is a story, Sean. So, being the youngest was hard when it came to lineage. Because every single one of my mom's children ended up Ephraim. And so I was her last hope to feel like a connection. There was...
Because your mom was what?
Manasseh.
And that's the typical thing,
That's
right?
the typical Native American,
Native Americans are given tribe of Manasseh.
Yeah. And she'd given up...
As if there's this blood lineage that literally flows through Lehi and Nephi and Laman and Lemuel all the way through to Native Americans, right?
Yeah.
Even though there were 3
Yeah,
tribes.
she'd given up a lot to join the church. She had an amazing conversion story and gave up everything. I mean, she gave up her entire previous life, basically, to join the church. And so, as each one of her children are being, told they're Ephraim, there was a degree of pain, but she was like, oh, maybe Sarah's going to be Manasseh. I remember her saying this over and over, and And so she was really excited for me to get my patriarchal blessing. So I got it at age 12. Like, I think that's a little young because I remember being very playful. I was, as much as I am into research and sourcing and kind of obsessive about research, at 12, I was obsessive about, play and imagination. I remember the most exciting part of me going to get my patriarchal blessing was this red fox running along the tree line out in the country, if that tells you where my head was. But, I get my patriarchal blessing and I'm Ephraim. And I remember just this distance beginning, just like I almost felt like it was a letdown or my fault, but I think in some ways, my mom's family was taken from her in a way, and then her children were, and it's not literal, I know it's not literal, but mentally, I think it was hard for her. It was hard for me to feel like a disappointment, but yeah.
It's weird because if she had internalized that sort of hatred for the dark skin or the cursings, I guess in one logical strain she would want her children to now be, Gentiles and be white, and delightsome. But I guess there's also that pull of just wanting people to be like you and wanting your kids to be a part of you.
She wanted, I think she wanted to share that, and I think that's natural of any mom to want to share with at least one of their children, their lineage. But I was often told growing up that I was white, that I wasn't Native American. I'd still be brought home to Alaska to visit family and see my grandma and stuff, but I felt so disconnected because I was being told I was white, but I wasn't treated like I was white at church or school. Then I'd go home to Alaska and I felt like I was an outsider because I didn't understand the culture completely. But my grandma was amazing. Like, she was the center of the family. They still celebrate her life on her birthday every year, even though she's gone. She was so loving and she was always accepting. There was this one time I was maybe 10, and I can see it's ridiculous that my grandmother was of the Eagle clan. I'm an Eagle clan. It passes through the matriarchal system. My daughters have that. My uncles never let go of me. I reached out to one of my cousins and reconnected just this year. I sent a few text messages and stuff, but I'm super shy. Like, how do you express love for people that don't know who you are and can't trust you because they've been rejected by you, in a way? There's just this division because I put Mormonism first. I mean, when I say I was full true blue member, I mean in every sense. I didn't have time to go visit. I had callings. I didn't have time to write. I didn't have time to text. I didn't have time to serve anybody outside of my Mormon realm. And he has no idea how I feel. And there's these bridges I'm trying to build now, but really I just need a chance to go back and visit. And it's it's not just about them either. It's like reclaiming this identity that's been stolen. Reclaiming a pride about it. Letting not just other people know what I stand for, but I guess it's more letting myself stand for those things and say, no, that wasn't right. It's been an emotional journey because I was told I was white, and when I got that Ephraim, I was told that that's the white lineage, and so I always felt like I was being torn in pieces, and then we'd have missionaries over for dinner, and they'd look at me, and my husband, I'd be sitting there, and they'd look at me and say, well, what are you? And depending where we lived, in Texas, there's a big Hispanic population, so people, automatically think I'm Hispanic. But it's really depended where we live. People are just like, hey, what's your, and they don't mean it offensively, but they don't ask my husband. He could be Irish, English,
Swedish, Norwegian.
Technically, he's Scandinavian.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I won't get to details, but there's this labeling that happens when you have brown skin, where people want to be able to put you in a category. And for me, it was never the category I felt naturally drawn to or felt like I belonged to. It was always, no, you're supposed to be over here. I remember when the first Sunday that we weren't going to church, I walked out into the front yard and just stood in the sun. I'm wearing a tank top, short shorts, and I was like, I'm not moving out of the sun. And sadly enough, it was hard for me. I kept wanting to it was so ingrained in me, which is embarrassing, now. But to say that these teachings don't affect people is ignorant. And it kind of goes back to the ignorance, when we talked about racism in the beginning of our conversation, that it's just ignorance, denial. And, the church is run by businessmen and lawyers, and I think that's a lot why there's a lot of plausible deniability. If there can be any doubt anywhere, doubt your doubts. So, I don't know.
So if you were to make this has been so wonderful, this is beautiful and powerful and touching. If you were to try and summarize, let me just take a couple things specifically. So first of all, the teachings in the Book of Mormon around skin and everything. If you were just to very plainly say why you think those teachings are harmful as teachings, and then we'll get to the separate thing about giving people an identity that may be false and that may be harmful. If you just had to speak plainly to why the teachings in the Book of Mormon are damaging, what would you say?
How is anybody able to be proud of their brown skin when they are told that it is the sign of being cursed? It's not the curse itself. I know how they word it, that's not the curse. But how is anybody to be proud of their skin or feel okay with it when the sign of the curse is only taken away depending on righteousness? And of course, they're getting rid of that now because obviously people don't lighten. They don't change colors. They're born a certain color and that's it. Common sense, honesty. I'd like to push a lot of honesty in the church. If there's anything I stand for, it's that. I had a hard time even telling my kids that Santa Claus was coming, I tried to argue with my first child that he wasn't real, and she was like, no, he is. I'm like, okay, we'll play Santa Claus. So we do Santa Claus now, but it was hard for me. And that's, how can we say that this isn't a lie? That this curse being dark skin is not a lie. How can we deny its effect?
We know that in Joseph's time, people were trying to figure out where Native Americans came from if the Bible were true, and they were trying to figure out why they had dark skin because they didn't have science. And so obviously, just like people tried to say that black people came from Cain being cursed, it makes sense to take that folk teaching and then apply it to Native Americans. So I think that's obviously where Joseph got that idea.
I dealt with a lot of anger, and I had to figure out where my anger was coming from. I wasn't angry at my parents for teaching me these things. I wasn't angry at Joseph Smith or Brigham Young, because everybody lives in their own reality in their time. Thankfully, we have, we're in the age of information. It's different now. What I have a problem with, and where my anger stems from slightly, is I wrote, I have this list of like 40 things that I found wrong, but then I wrote a new list of why I have major issues with the church. And it's not pointing out all the things that are off and wrong. It's modern day cover-up. I don't expect Joseph to say sorry or make up for things that maybe he got wrong. But I do expect modern day, the church now, to not keep making those mistakes. I expect them to respect and love and stand for, am I being honest in all my dealings, which is a temple question. If they're not being honest in all their dealings, they're not living their own religion.
So, my aim, the purpose for which I'm creating this video and looking at your thoughts in your interview would be different than what, when I'm saying you, Sarah, is different from, what John's focus is. I think all of us would rather, good things happen with people instead of evil. So John's looking at the cultural ramifications, if I'm correctly stating it, or what I'm getting out of what he's looking at. But you said you'd like the church to be the church is corporation. So you'd like the brethren to be honest and try to correct Joseph's mistakes. And you say they're not even living their own religion. Okay, this is where my viewpoint differs quite a bit from what you've just expressed there. I in no way believe that the high-end leadership of the church, the people that have been groomed for leadership from childhood, usually in certain family lines probably, or in a society that is not visible in the church, in any way believe in Mormonism, in the religion that they market. Neither do I believe that the leaders of many religions believe in the religion that they market to the people. In any sort of, Christian venue, for instance, there are leaders in religions, in say, if neo-Christian is a proper label for something like the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, the Jehovah's Witnesses, or Seventh-day Adventists, or Scientology, or the Moonies, or I'm looking at, these are all pretty heavy-duty into cult mind control, but most of them, they're focused there. They say Christ is their, center there. Actually, I don't know much about Scientology. I know the Moonies, Christ is supposed to be a big deal there, but the people are cultists that create these religions. They're marketing something to, what maybe they consider the goyim. It's not at all their religion, and I don't think it ever was Joseph Smith's religion or his true belief. It's not that he got it wrong. He created or marketed with someone else's, some help from others, but he created a belief system. He created tangible evidence to substantiate his claim that he was God's vicar, like the Pope. He was the new Pope. He was the broker of salvation, of religion. Says the Pope is, the broker of God's salvation to the Catholic world, like Reverend Moon is for the Moonies. So, and like L. Ron Hubbard for the Scientologists. And I don't know much about this, all about the structure of the Jehovah's Witnesses, but Charles Taze Russell, heavy-duty occultist, high-degree Freemason as well. All these people are cultists. It's not their religion, and it never was. You're going on this premise that you think that they got something wrong, that this was their religion, and it never was. It never was. It's a means of controlling people and fleecing them. So if you ever wonder why they're so callous to do things that hurts people so much, they never cared about you. Now, so the other thing is you're separated from you've got an imaginary heritage as a Lamanite. It's completely fabricated. And, you say you miss your people. And I'm not, who am I to say how you feel about yours? That's half of your people. The other half of your people are, white people from Ireland. Do you go to Ireland and visit them? I don't know. Or maybe that was your husband. I mean, your dad, right? Wasn't your dad? Pardon me if I got something wrong there. But, I can look and see what I didn't grow up in the church, but my family is, European, Scandinavian type of heritage mostly. Do we go back to Scandinavia? No. I had some cousins that lived real close and some cousins that didn't live that far apart, and, they're nice people, but my life really hasn't been about trying to hang out with my cousins. It was about my immediate family, because I was trying to take care of a family and people that are closest to me that I very, very much love. And so, some people feel like they need to reach out to their cousins. I like my cousins, but, it was about my immediate family for me. And so I've got an invented heritage, I suppose, of priesthood lineage back to who knows where. People doing their genealogical research in the church, if you're looking into Native American roots, it's probably different, difficult to go very far. I don't know. So Europeans, they feel like they're connecting and bringing temple blessings, baptism and marriages, sealings to people based on some fairy tale. So I guess we all get, when we figure out that we've just been made merchandise of, we've been paying, the ticket sellers for the gates to heaven when they were counterfeit, and there is no CK, yeah, I don't know, hurts everybody. We all have a false heritage created by the whole biblical story and all this, the Melchizedek priesthood, the order of Melchizedek, the degrees of the celestial kingdom. It's all Freemasonry and magic. And we're all made merchandise of. So the church was founded on fraud. It was never about truth. It was never about it was never about getting something right. It was about creating, what appeared to be legitimate looking evidence that the Hebrew God was restoring a kingdom with Joseph at the top of the dispensation, whereby he could have anything that he wanted. And, the doctrines, the secret doctrines that he taught within the Council of 50 and the spiritual wife system, all those women who were exploited and made into, sexual property of Joseph and his buddies. I never see the real, story going on of the spiritual wife system on the internet when people discuss things. They're talking about, did Joseph Smith get, intimately involved with some of these girls where he came up with the sealing doctrine, when he couldn't talk some of them into the spiritual wife system. If you read what Sarah Pratt's got to say, and I basically read, created some of the videotapes I've done. I just read the account of Joseph H. Jackson. If you read what actually went on in Nauvoo, it's nothing like polygamy. Brigham did polygamy later. Polygamy is like a cover-up for the spiritual wife system. It's horrendous. Joseph Smith didn't care about anyone that I can see. He trampled everyone. You noticed the ceiling, the discrepancy. Well, if he loved Emma and he got this ceiling power, why was she number 14 on the list? Because it was just part of a sham to get more girls into the corral there. That he couldn't win over with the doctrine out of Hosea, chapter 3 or whatever it is. So it's a joke, and the joke's been on everybody who's victimized by it. It's tithing is like interest. When Gordon B. Hinckley said, interest is something that those who understand collect, and those who do not pay. Well, the same through. It's that way with tithing. Those who understand it collect it. Those who don't pay it. It's a tribute to the masters, to those who own the church, the owners and operators of the church, as far as the paid positions and or the dividend receivers from the shares and the actual stock of the corporation. Corporations that receive benefit from the wealth of the company and companies. It's masquerading under the guise of this imaginary God of Israel, and maybe you'll see that, maybe I've yet to see that. So honesty never was a factor. It's not their religion, and it never was. How people rise in the ranks that are not part of a society that is not known to the rest is, I don't know how people move from one side to the other, but I believe that the founders, if you read enough, I think you'll find that the criminal enterprise of Joseph Smith and some of the original apostles was pretty horrendous. They were involved in all sorts of criminal enterprise, and everything that they did is completely opposite of what they preach. And if you look at what we can document from Joseph Smith's life, if you throw out the counterfeiting and all the criminal stuff that the Danites were doing, and bringing to the bishop's storehouse from their raids, in Missouri, you throw all that out and you just look at, okay, well, did Joseph Smith keep the word of wisdom? There's so many journal entries from people who were even his friends. He's a big time drinker. He wasn't obeying this word of wisdom, and he comes up with it, right after a distillery gets closed down in Kirtland by the Temperance Society, which basically had a word of wisdom that it seems like he almost copied. Same principles, including everything, meat, the whole deal. Of course, you also may notice that the church doesn't enforce the whole meat thing, the temple recommended thing, because the church is heavily into the meat business, so they ignore that part. Look at the SDA, and they've got I haven't read their word of wisdom, but Loma Linda manufactures, kind of soy products and things. They're not into eating animals, and they actually live their religion when it comes to that. Whereas Mormonism, it's ignored. It's all kinds of meat eaten in Mormonism, especially in Utah. The members of the church ignore that. You go to a ward dinner, there's always meat there. Could be the middle of summer. It doesn't have to be cold or famine. They just ignore that entirely because the church is big into the meat business. It's a financial enterprise, and it always has been. Yeah. So anyway, Joseph Smith did not obey the word of wisdom. Joseph Smith was not chaste or benevolent ever that I can see. He was a whoremonger to the max. The spiritual wife system was one of the sickest forms of human trafficking I've ever read about. So it's far different from what's presented to us, and it's so different that it's too shocking for most people to even begin to comprehend. Because they hold these people in high esteem. You look at people like, Jeffrey Holland, and like he's supposed to be a holy man, but this guy is like, Jim Baker, Jim and Tammy Baker. They're actors. He doesn't believe a word he says. guys are masters at, arts of persuasion and, neurolinguistic programming, and they fake emotions. They'll do all sort of things to get you to believe that they're sincere when they're not at all sincere. They don't believe these things at all. The inner workings of the church, at the upper levels, are much different than what we would perceive. We wouldn't ever have been members if we'd understood what it is. The whole thing is a complete scam. So, well, anyway, maybe you'll see that. I wish you all the best. Great job, Sarah. Great job, John, in the interviews. And yeah, church damages people much, much more than many people realize, because people of this ilk don't care about others at all. They seem to be beyond feeling, past feeling. So it's been built on fraud the entire time. And the Gospel Topics essays are not about coming clean. They're about trying to look like you're being more transparent and finding another way to deceive you. All they do is lie. You picked up some of their lies, Sarah. You picked up on, the fact that they lied in the DNA thing. That's all they've ever done. It's all they ever will do. Everything is built on making the corporation profitable. Monetarily profitable. It has nothing to do with any of the principles that are preached. You got to separate it completely in your mind. And Joseph Smith was the same way. It was never what it was perpetrated to be to the people. Okay, that's about all I wanted to do on this. They're completely dishonest at the top and always have been. Okay, so if you want to see the rest of that interview, that's on Mormon Stories, John Dehlin does, and some of the Losing the Lamanites, what number was it, 761 or something like that, under Mormon Stories, if you would like to see that. John Dehlin has interviewed a lot of people on a lot of subjects having to do with people leaving Mormonism based on it being a lie. At least that's how I see it, and there's a lot of material there that's pretty eye-opening. By Sarah, by John, by 3 liars, by 2 more liars, 2 people who woke up and left Mormonism and formed themselves on the shelf. 2 more liars, again, from the 3 Mormons, Mormon apologists, marketing Mormonism to children and dealing with the fact that the church is being attacked by Christians and others who've noticed things that are criticizable, and then these guys trying to make it look normal that the church is trying to look like Christians now to blend in. And this guy right here, Gordon B. Hinckley, was big time pushing that, saying, oh, that was just a little couplet more than anything else. We don't know much about becoming gods. I don't know anybody who does. No, he's just president of the church, and Joseph Smith said it was like the first order of the gospel is to learn the nature of God. So it's incredible the crap that this guy, spewed. Gordon B. Hinckley. They asked him about what's his position, as a prophet, and he said he did say to declare doctrine, but he also, we've heard so much about the church saying that the need, is to restore a living prophet to guide the church through revelation to God. And what did Gordon Hinckley say? Well, we've got a lot of revelation. We got it through Joseph Smith, and we really don't need hardly any more. Sounded just like a Christian. He said we need to just pay attention to what we've got. And he said polygamy. Oh, I don't believe that's doctrinal. He denied everything that Mormonism was about in order to create the image of being just another Christian denomination, which is what Quack Goo and crew here of Three Mormons is pushing. The whole idea that the church is just Christian, like any other Christian denomination, so they can blend in to the Christian crowd. Alright, some of the recent videos there. And saw it on the Dodger Game channel. Go Dodgers. Go Clayton Kershaw. Go Mormon Truth. So this is the part where I say, hey, remember to subscribe and do some liking and go into the channel and find more videos documenting things having to do with the church, its history, changing doctrine, and all that sort of thing. See you in the comment section.